Hello, and welcome to Secure Talk, a podcast where we explore the critical world of information security innovation and compliance. I'm your host, Justin Beals, founder and CEO of StrikeGraph. Together with our expert guests, we'll provide you tools and tips to help your business thrive in the rapidly evolving cybersecurity environment. Hi, everybody, and welcome to Secure Talk. It's a pretty exciting day for us. This is our first live episode, which means all types of danger. This is your host, Justin Beals. I am very lucky to have a colleague with me today, Christy Wyatt from Absolute Security. Christy is also a member of the board of directors for Ericsson and Silicon Labs. Thanks, Christy, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pretty fun week for us. It's going to be very busy. We're live at RSA.
It's a big week.
Have you been to this conference a bunch?
Many, many times.
It must have changed a lot, hasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we were talking a little bit about this over the weekend. It used to be, much smaller, much more sort of intimate, and it's exciting to see what it's grown into. It really is the biggest conversation in security for our industry. One of the two, I think. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. And we were here last year. We did do a pretty sizable booth, and I think there was 30 to 40,000 attendees. So it's huge, and you can get lost in it a little bit.
Definitely can get lost.
Yeah. Christy, first thing that I'd love to ask a little bit is about your early experiences in technology. You've had a long career in it, but you could have picked a lot of different paths. What drew you to the work?
I think like a lot of folks in our industry, I'm an accidental technologist.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't writing code as a child or doing, but I did come from a long family of builders. And I think that through a series of events, I sort of landed in programming classes for the first time and realized, oh, this is building. I can actually solve problems. And if your brain is wired that way, all of a sudden the light bulb goes on and sort of exciting things happen. And I think I just sort of fell in love with it.
Yeah. Somewhere between Lincoln Logs and Hot Wheel tracks and.
Absolutely. And then the ability to connect that to really hard problems, right? And automation. And again, just as a relatively young person at the time, it just sort of launched a whole creative half of my brain that was a lot of fun to run with.
Both of us cut our teeth early in our careers in telecommunications. Mm-hmm. I was always floored by the power of being able to just reach out and chat with someone quite quickly. One of my first jobs at BT, I'd have to be on the phone with an engineer in Frankfurt or someone in Tokyo. And it was very awe-inspiring and powerful.
And also a little bit scary, right? I think where I really started to learn programming was at the College of Geographic Sciences. And we were doing, the school predominantly focused on a lot of GIS and remote sensing at a time when you really needed supercomputers and big systems in order to do that. And I was very much focused on the programming side of that. And my first job, I was actually in a satellite communications company based up in Canada. And so the whole off by one error has a very different meaning when it's the difference between north and south.
Yeah.
So this whole concept of connectivity. And then again, at that time, it was just how do we make a connection later in my career as we started thinking about things like Java and the internet and applications that could be run in a connected way. I mean, it's profoundly changed our world. And it was really exciting to be in the middle of that and seeing it unfold around us.
I remember these days where just small issues bothered us as engineers. In some ways, we've gotten away from that, where we're qualitatively okay with a certain amount of inaccuracy. And I think that we sometimes don't build the best products because we're willing to deal with that. Yeah.
I think, it's especially true in security, where the issue is not so much quality, but complexity.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we really focus on at Absolute is the more technology, and especially, security is another layer of technology, the more we add to these devices, all with good intentions, we are actually creating our own vulnerability. The complexity itself starts to create a whole new set of vulnerabilities. And so there are folks that would categorize that as a quality issue. And we heard a lot about that in sort of the supply chain conversation over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
But if you're close enough to the folks who are doing the work, very rarely do you see bad intentions, and mostly do you see just complexity. The infinite amount of things you need to test with in order to make sure this stuff works is really hard.
And when we lose track of what's happening in a complex system, the opportunity for a catastrophic failure due to cascading issues grows immensely, as we see in a lot of different vectors.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we like to talk, especially at this conference, right? You're going to hear a lot of conversation around AI and probably wandering into quantum and starting to talk, I mean, all sorts of really interesting, sexy topics around technology. And so it's almost a little bit boring to sort of come back and talk about sort of compliance and just making sure that stuff is working. But that really is the easy door, right? I was in a conversation a couple of days ago and somebody said, you really could do these really big, complex attacks with supercomputers, but the easy path is to go steal like the admin's email address, right? Or offer them a chunk of money. And so we're still fighting a battle that is really on the ground level. And so we can't let ourselves wander away from that.
I do think that there is this, in my experience in the security space over the last 4 years, there's been a real need to work on that baseline habits, like good habits at an organization that create foundational security and then build on top of the fears from there. And I worry sometimes that in the opportunity to buy the sexiest new product, we miss the opportunity to do good habits at the business.
I draw a lot of analogies between security and quality. I think when we were going through a different sort of industrial spike within our industries or within our companies, right, we very quickly realized that quality was not the responsibility of the quality department. It had to be a conversation that was pervasive within the organization.
Yeah.
And so what you're sort of touching on a little bit is the culture of security. Mm-hmm. And how do you make security not just the CISO's job? How do you make it the role of the organization so that people see risk and they identify risk in the same way that they identify quality issues or financial issues? They have to be able to sort of see cyber risk. And it can be difficult to build that because there is a complexity to it and people are really busy. So it's difficult to get folks to step out and think about a new layer of stuff.
Yeah.
But I've seen us make so much progress, and some of the tools that we're using within enterprise today are actually so much better in really sort of consumerizing the concepts around personal security and what the individual can do within the organization.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking about your security and compliance strategy and you're not tackling the human component, you're going to miss a huge step.
It is the softest target, I think. I mean, I'm a very open-hearted person. It's easy to convince me to do something. Yeah. There used to be a lot of conversation, I felt like, especially in the CISO space, about getting the board to work well towards security. I don't think that's as big of the issue anymore as much as the team broadly across the rest of the company to get engaged in the right area.
I still see a lot of opportunity on the board side. I do think that we've come a long way in getting, especially across public boards, but I'd say globally, people understanding the impact of cyber risk and the responsibility of the board to talk about risk appetite. It is a tough conversation to have within the organization, no matter how large you are, because you do have the cyber industry has an entirely different language. Mm-hmm. You are talking about risk. And so there is an entirely different language around that. And it is a much less mature risk area than other areas like financial risk. So an analogy I like to make is if you think across the board, we all know that you need to have a financial expert and you need to have auditors and you need to have, and there's this entire ecosystem that's built around sort of checks and balances and making sure that we're all being responsible and that we're checking one another's math.
Right.
And that doesn't exist yet in the cyber world. We do have frameworks like NIST, and we do have an ecosystem building out that helps us test and sort of proclaim, but it's not yet to the same level of maturity. We don't see all boards yet having cyber experts. And even when you do, it is difficult to make that translation because the board conversation is really around risk appetite.
Yeah.
Right. And it's very tough to calibrate risk appetite and what's actually happening on the ground and how protected are we and how protected should we be. And then don't even get me started on disclosure and regulatory that's sort of coming in and making it even more complicated. So I think that it's tough on both sides. I have a huge amount of empathy for the CISO who's trying. I mean, they're our front line and they're trying really hard to do all of the right things.
Yeah.
And there's all of these challenges to sort of test and certify and communicate and disclose, and not everything is perfectly aligned yet. And so it's a little bit like being the financial expert without having the infrastructure. right?
Yeah.
And so there's a fair amount of personal risk for those individuals right now.
Yeah, we've certainly seen it. It's funny. I was talking with a friend recently, and we said there's not a lot of jobs that have an adversarial situation like a threat actor where you're expected to be successful 100% of the time. And yet there is that expectation for CISOs. And I think it's not appropriate, maybe.
I was talking to a CEO on the weekend who's been through a major event, and he said almost exactly what you just said, which is it's an unfair expectation that we have to be right 100% of the time, and the adversary only needs to be right once. Listen, there are many risk and landscapes, physical and cyber aside, that have that same dynamic. What we want to make sure is that we're building an infrastructure that is supportive of the people who are on the front line and that have the depth and the context and understanding of what's involved in order to get there. And so we just have a little bit of maturing, I think, to do around the edges.
Yeah. I also think that, to your point about getting the broader team involved in security, that there's just not necessarily a lot of awareness. Our jargon hasn't helped, but everyone does have a part to play, is what I've learned, from the software engineer that wants to write more secure code through to the VP of HR who's helping us from fraud prevention and some of those softer target areas. Yeah.
I think this trend in sort of consumerizing the risk conversation, and a lot of really great work has been done. There's some really great learning platforms. We use some internally to help sort of educate and advise across the employee organization.
Yeah.
And so when people think about cyber risk, they think about attacks that are happening in a back room and dark and people in hoodies. And right. I mean, it's a very
not all hackers wear hoodies.
World, yeah. Right? And what they don't think about is somebody wandering up to you in the parking lot and saying, here's a bag of money. Can I have your password for an hour?
Yeah.
Right? Which is happening.
Yeah.
And they don't really see how the employee population can get weaponized by people who, it may not be your business. You just may be the conduit into something bigger. And so getting folks to understand that broader sort of person and what that looks like in a very human context so that they see it, right? And I, by the way, think that starts before they ever get to work. I mean, interestingly, as parents, we're having this conversation with our children now as they get online, right? About password. I find myself talking to my 10-year-old about password safety, which, I mean, is kind of a mind-blowing idea, right?
Yes, but happening faster than we wanted it to. Yeah,
absolutely.
I also have found that, and we're in a little bit of a path here from our discussion, but one of the things that we've found has been helpful is kind of tasking some of those folks with a security responsibility. It fits inside their job area, like you need to develop secure code, or you need to be a peer reviewer that analyzes code for security on the peer review, but that has helped at least build the awareness side.
It will not work if you don't have a partnership going across the organization. So you have to have not just the good intention, but also the sort of accountability to build the process and manage the process. And it has to be through every level of the organization. So cyber risk is not the responsibility of the CISO. They are the champion and the leader of that conversation. But there is definitely a village around every level and across every part of the organization that says, if I take that conversation and I apply it to what I'm doing, what are all the different ways that things could go horribly wrong? Yeah. And how do I help? And how do I build that roadmap? And how do I build that framework? And I think that it's not an unwillingness for organizations. It's just it is a new muscle that we're building inside a lot of companies right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have really transitioned from those days at Inmarsat and writing code to a business leader. I'm always a little curious on that translation from an engineer to actually capturing what's happening in engineering from a business perspective. Talk us a little through that transition from your career perspective.
I think that I've always been driven by really hard problems, and I get very excited about technology like many of us do. But early on, and I was very blessed to work with some just amazing platforms in their really formative stage, like Java and Linux, and the internet was new and mobile as a whole. So in those conversations, right, connecting the ecosystem to the opportunity always sort of seemed to be the gap. And I think Java was one of the earliest places where we saw that, where you had this profound platform. And as a programmer, you were like, this blows my mind. This is amazing. I can write an application. I can run on all these different things. And I was doing it with telecommunications. I was doing it with folks like Nortel and the Ericssons and the Motorola's of the world. But building that bridge between, in that case, it was a three-way partnership, right? The developers had to understand and see the opportunity. The platforms had to support it. And then you had these network operators that needed to see what was in it for them. How is this going to help them grow their relationship with their customer?
Right.
And so I think the areas of opportunity that have often been sort of the shiny objects for me are these sort of formative ecosystems where you say, wow, there's this really cool thing that you could do, but if you really can't contemplate all the different ways it could go. And so now you're talking about platforms and tools and networks and how you get it out to as many different people as possible. And so whether it was Java or Linux or Android or the various different companies I've been with, that's always seemed to be sort of the exciting piece for me, is how do you connect the dots for folks so that everybody can sort of see the opportunity for themselves?
Well, I'm a huge fan because I learned to program Oak before it was called Java. And of course, I think some of your outreach to the developer community, certainly I was a recipient of that. And I saw that vision, right? I can code this, run it anywhere. Object-oriented programming was really mind-blowing. Yeah, it's very exciting. And I built some businesses that just focused on open source software development in spaces that needed it. So it was a huge benefit. Yeah, it's very exciting. So you're currently the CEO at Absolute Security. The organization has been in business since the mid-90s. Could you tell us a little bit about the history of Absolute? Yeah.
So I'll tell you the history, and then I'll sort of connect it to this ecosystem concept. And why I sort of got excited about it when I saw it. But Absolute is not a young company. They started, as you mentioned, in the mid-90s. But the core use case was people were starting to give laptops and devices to children in school. So if you remember, we talked about one-to-one laptop initiatives, and children would sign a device out and take it at home to do their homework. And these were expensive devices at the time. And there was a pretty healthy black market in stealing somebody's backpack, reinstalling the operating system, and selling the device. So what you needed was something that even someone with hands on the keyboard couldn't get around, right? And the concept was build this tiny capability in the hardware itself that once it's activated, and that's an important piece, once you install one of our software products and it activates that piece in the hardware, that it never forgets that it's sort of connected to the Absolute service. And so in its earliest instantiation, it was really track and trace. You could reinstall the operating system, make that device forget everything it ever knew. But before it launched the operating system, it would say, hey, wait, I'm an Absolute device. And it would check in and reinstall itself and call home and say, were you looking for me? And we would work with law enforcement to get people their devices back. So it went under a number of different names. It was CompuTrace for a while, which many people remember. It was LoJack for laptops, which was super fun for a while.
Yeah, that's fun.
It had a long history. And a lot of the reason why I think folks were less familiar with the platform is because a lot of their path to market was really through that hardware ecosystem, really when you bought a laptop or a computer. I joined the company about 5.5 years ago, and this concept to me that you had almost every device on the planet has this self-awareness that has the ability to heal itself. Now, at that moment, it was healing itself with Absolute applications. But if you asked yourself, what's the most profound thing you could do with that? And we were just talking about compliance and why it's the baseline of cybersecurity and cyber hygiene. That there was just this much bigger opportunity. And that's really been kind of our focus, which is how do we open up that platform? How do we make that available to a broader cybersecurity ecosystem so that it's not just the Absolute platform that actually can self-heal itself, but that almost any security application. And for CISOs, what that means is the 25% of the time that they've installed with good intentions all of the right stuff, but it just stopped working. Like something bad happens and you go, well, that device was encrypted, right? And you're like, I think it was. I'm pretty sure it was. Or like that insider threat solution. Let's go replay the tape and find out what happened with that device. Oh, it stopped calling in 3 weeks ago and nobody noticed. Right. Those are the things where we see an immediate opportunity to say, no, the stuff you've spent valuable time and resources on and money should be running 98% of the time, guaranteed. And that's what we can help you do.
And you need to be able to make a change when it doesn't. I mean, one of the things that's been really frustrating for me in device management has been the transition from some vendors from a good security solution to malware themselves. And I think this kind of device management issue, it's a shifting landscape.
Right. Yeah. And so there's lots of things that can detect that something has been out of compliance, but how do you ensure that it is compliant? So we acquired a company a couple of years ago, really focused on the ZTNA side. We work with partners on this concept of comply to connect. And it's a really powerful concept that says, listen, your device should be compliant before you allow it to connect to anything.
Yeah.
And that was a really interesting idea when everybody was on campus. And then 60% of your employees went to go work from home, at least, right? It was 100%, maybe 60% of them are still mostly working from home, or at least on part of the time. And so it introduces a wrinkle, because do you want it to actually connect, then figure out that it's not compliant and then disconnect it?
Yeah.
And if that's the CEO, did you just want to interrupt their day and make that happen? You're going to get a very bad phone call if that's the workflow that you put out.
Right.
And our view is that compliance is something we should just be constantly doing in the background. If we are offline compliance and looking at the sort of the level of integrity of the security posture on that device, then ideally we would have detected it and fixed it long before it ever tried to connect to you. And I think that's a very powerful concept, both from a productivity perspective, but also from a posture perspective.
Well, and certainly when you're so deep in the device itself, you get an opportunity to set the requirements of that device being in compliance, whether it's connected to the network or not. That provides some resilience to the systems that are deployed more broadly.
We talk about resilience in almost every fashion. We think about resilience. We fundamentally believe that our platform is a resilience platform, and we think about it in a couple of different places. We think that your ability to maintain the security posture of that device, those applications themselves should be resilient. So our research shows that 25% of the time a device falls out of compliance at any given moment in time within an enterprise. If that's the average, that some are like much higher, some are much lower.
Yeah.
So how do we maintain the integrity of those security controls? The second piece of resilience is really, so then let's assume something catastrophic did happen. How do we actually restore service? So you're going to have a whole bunch of folks that are frantically trying to figure out what went wrong and how do we get rid of the bad thing?
Yeah.
And then you've got this whole business continuity conversation that says, fair enough, that's going to run its course. But in the meantime, I've got 1,000 employees sitting in their living rooms that can't work.
Right.
And so business continuity and the resilience of the business, interestingly, and a lot of people don't understand that that's where the real cost comes from. The ability to fix and manage the systems and get rid of the infection is expensive and hard, and there's super smart people working on that. But then your ability to actually run the business in the meantime is kind of critical. And I still talk to a lot of CISOs when I say, now, how exactly do you do that? How do you get your business back online? They said, well, everybody unplugs their device and they put it in a box and they ship it back to us. And then we ship them a new one. And so some of the cool stuff we've been working on and that we're showing here is how do we actually make that all happen remotely from within the hardware itself? How do we, when a device is completely disconnected from the network and from your network, how can we take it down, make sure that it is from within the firmware itself, sort of wiped, cleaned, reinstalled, cleared, either restored back to a healthy backup or sort of slowly rehydrated to layer back on your security controls so that we can, in an automated way, hand it back to the organization and the organization can get that user sort of back up and online, all completely remote. So when we think about resilience, as cyber people, we think about the ability to defend ourselves, but we think about it holistically as you have to defend yourself and inevitably someone will be smarter than you. And so how do we snap back, right?
And this is a theme, I think, for you and in some of the things that I had read on Absolute, and I'm sure there's nuance to this, but it's easy to make a binary, cybersecurity and cyber resilience. How do you think about the differences from those two concepts?
I actually see them as one and the same. Okay. I actually think that you can't have a robust cybersecurity product if you haven't thought about resilience. Mm-hmm. We have a ZTNA and secure access product, which does that sort of compliance check as a part of connectivity.
Yeah.
But they also have a lot of really great embedded technology and capability about how do you make the network connection resilient itself.
Yeah.
As you're roaming around and the network connection goes up and down, how do we make sure those first responders are still connected and still working?
Yeah.
So we really think of resilience at almost every layer of the application to make sure that what we're really focused on is that users are up and running, their productivity is not impacted, and that they're working in a highly secure way.
Yeah.
So I don't see them as separate things. Some folks try to draw this delineation that you think about sort of detection and defense, and then you think about sort of remediation and recovery.
Right.
And I believe that it's actually something that has to be built into your almost every layer of the capability you're giving to customers. This is what we're supposed to do. And if it doesn't happen, then what?
Yeah. Absolute publishes a cyber resiliency index. You just launched your most recent one.
We did.
Yeah. Any findings that you found super interesting from the most recent publication?
So we run this report every year, and you can see all the previous years on our website as well. And this year we focused on a couple of different things. One is we always try to focus on, are we getting better at creating resiliency of the security controls themselves? And as I mentioned, I think our research shows that we're still running. We sort of narrowed the focus and said for devices that say, let's say they have 4 security policies on them, which is modest, by the way, because most devices have over a dozen.
Right.
So let's say 4. What percentage of those devices were non-compliant at any moment in time? And the answer was 24%, which is kind of shocking.
Yeah.
If you overlay that number on top of how much you're spending on security every year and just take 24 cents out of every dollar, it's a humbling number.
Yeah.
And it's really easy to fix because the devices already have this capabilities within them, right? If you turn on self-healing for the application, right, that resilience will kind of go up to 98%.
I have to say, I've never thought of it in those economic terms, that you're essentially trying to do device management, but 25 cents of every dollar is being
25
wasted.
cents or 25% of your devices have a problem and you're still letting them connect.
On average, too.
On average. And so look, and you can't shoot darts on this because it is a humbling, both for the CIO and the CISO. This is a ridiculously hard problem.
Yes.
We've talked in previous years about how many different versions, if you take OS versions and patches, and there's over 300 different versions of Windows 10. Then you have, say, your dozen security controls and all the different versions of those.
Yes.
And the status of them working. And then you have your other 96 applications you have running on that device.
Right.
Then you have the network configuration and how you've actually configured that device, and it's sitting in everybody's personal network. Like the test matrix from an engineer's perspective of the infinite number of combinations you would have to test to get this exactly right is just mind-boggling. It's a great AI problem, by the way, but it is a very, very hard. If you're relying on humans with hands on keyboards to come and fix things, or humans being aware of there being a problem to proactively push a fix, you're fighting a losing battle. So that was the first, I think, surprise.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing we thought, because we know that everybody's talking about this entire fleet upgrade that's coming. Folks are very excited about AI. We couldn't have a podcast without saying AI at least a dozen times. Otherwise, I'm sure there'd be a fine involved.
Absolutely.
And so we took a look and we said, how many endpoint devices that we see actively connecting to the enterprise are actually even ready?
Yeah.
Right. And if you take the profile of ready, being what analysts are saying are going to be required to run full large language models on the device themselves.
Yeah.
Then I think that it was 90 some odd % that will have to be touched in some way in order to upgraded, updated, replaced. And so that's a massive cycle ahead of us that's happening. The interesting thing that we didn't really focus on the index, but I know is on a lot of folks' minds, is that the number of applications that will then get added to these devices will also exponentially grow. So if the average number of enterprise applications on a device is 100, and let's assume let's say a dozen of your favorite are going to add some sort of co-pilot model to it.
Right.
That's a bunch more complexity and a bunch more stuff and a bunch more unique data that you're going to want to protect, whether that device is online or offline. And so this resilience component is going to be a critical part of maintaining security as you go through that transition.
Not only data in, but data out, right? Like these models are greedy. They're trying to feed back to
for 10 years, we've convinced ourselves that any data worth keeping is sitting in the cloud, and therefore the device is sort of a commodity and it's okay. But if you think about how rapidly these devices are going to be learning and changing and modifying, the ability for those devices to be connecting and actually synchronizing that data in real time up to the cloud is actually challenging, to say I'm being kind, I think. And so the value, and so let's assume that we had to restore you and we restored the digital twin or whatever unique insights that model has learned on that device. Is it going to have the same learnings? You're not going to be able to replay the tape. What value did you lose, both from a security and a risk perspective, as well as an enterprise value perspective? So there's a whole bunch of unique angles just around compliance, right? Yeah. We all want to talk about deep fakes and all the other fun stuff AI is going to do, but But if I just narrowly focus on how do I roll this stuff out safely and not blow up my compliance and my security posture on the endpoint, I think there's some interesting work we need to do there. And then the third thing is just, we asked ourselves the question, are we getting better at updates and upgrades? Because we know a lot has been written about how long it takes organizations to get end users and devices up to their required level.
Yeah.
And I don't think we saw a lot of inspiring data there. I think we saw that folks are still sort of trailing behind, and it's not by design. So if an IT manager set a policy that says, I want to stay 2 versions behind, and many do, we're measuring against that. We're not measuring against the new. So we're measuring against whatever their policy is. And we're still seeing a large lag in folks being able to kind of get. So as we go through this week and everybody's going to put out their vulnerabilities,
scariest findings,
many known attack surfaces and problems we already know about, and we already know how to fix them. I'm going to come back to complexity, right? These are hard problems, and there's a finite capacity to the human beings that are trying to do this work.
One of the things that really was a little bit of an aha or an epiphany for me in the last year around cyber resilience was watching the Lockbit takedown. We can look at the adversary in a way and see how are we doing relatively. And they were taken down by FBI and back up a week later. I think that, to your point, that's the type of, we need to be prepared for that type of resilience. Yeah.
I mean, just like any other rapidly evolving ecosystem, you have to assume that innovation is evenly distributed.
Yes.
So it would be a mistake to live in your bubble and think that only your country or only sort of the white hats are the ones doing the innovation or doing the deep research. You have to assume that folks are either as fast as you or in some cases getting ahead of you. And so as much as we're talking about resilience, you have to imagine that folks are also talking about persistence on the other side. And so agility matters.
Yeah. One of the things that was really interesting to me in reading about Absolute, of course, another vector of attack is ransomware, and it's been growing quite a lot. And ransomware preparedness is a topic for Absolute Security. Can you help define the tactics around ransomware preparedness and how you guys think about that?
So I'm always very careful to be clear that there are many, many smart people at this conference that are focused on the detection of ransomware.
Yeah.
And that's not really our focus, right?
Okay.
Again, think of us as an immune system that's helping all of those solutions be better. Because if they're not running, they can't help you. So that's the first piece. The second piece is when a device is in an infected state, oftentimes it's incommunicable to the rest of the organization. And if that user is remote, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So if it's started infecting your users and those users are in any way hybrid or remote or even distributed across multiple offices, that's going to be a challenge. And so because of our place in sort of the boot sequence and within the hardware itself, we do have an opportunity to sometimes inject ourselves into that process. We have a ransomware remediation service where if there is devices that are in that sort of frozen state, can we get in and ahead of it, when it's cycling? Can we do the work sort of under the covers to, first of all, isolate the device? And then second, start to prop up the other valuable tools that are required in order for those organizations to do what they need to do on that device. So we're trying to get it back up to a safe state. And then the third thing is that if you have devices that are really beyond recovery, and again, they're remote, we have this capability, as I mentioned before, endpoint rehydration that says, fine, now you're in cleanup mode. And so let's not box up 10,000 laptops and ship them around the universe. Like let's just within hours start to clean piece by piece and get users back online. And so it's an impact to business continuity and kind of getting folks back online. So think of us as kind of an immune system for prevention and then also sort of a part of your remediation strategy. And the last thing I would say is if as an organization, you are not incorporating remote users into your business continuity tabletop exercises, you are missing the bulk of the work, right? Because it is time consuming and expensive and complex. And I just think folks maybe don't play the tape all the way through. They sort of get to, okay, we've contained the bad thing and we've talked to walls, we've done our disclosures. And so then he will take it from here. And how long are you going to be down? Because oftentimes the cost of that is the thing that's crushing within the organization.
Yeah. So if I think about a ransomware style attack and we're talking about a device, I mean, I can imagine some of the things I'm looking for are the re-encryption of data that I didn't push, or signals that are coming from, whether it's a server or a local device, that something's changing on the data side of that particular laptop. One could think, it disappears, right? Like all of a sudden it's been encrypted in such a way that it can't communicate with the network that I wanted it to. But then on the backside, you could be like, I'm down for a day or I'm down for 3 weeks.
I mean, I was reading over the weekend, and the Clorox breach, I think, was last August.
Yeah.
And we have an event this evening, actually, with William Barr, and we're going to be talking about CISO compliance. And as a part of that, I was reading, how long is it taking the organizations to actually clean up from these events? And I think they said in August that remediation was going to take them well into 2024.
Wow.
We see breaches all the time. There was one in Canada I was reading about just a week or so ago where their actual business systems are down 4 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Because they can't, either they can't get the systems back up, or they don't trust that when they get those systems back up, so there's a number of levels of cleanup you have to go through. And so that's what I mean about business continuity, right? There is an understanding of the systems infected in the first place, and then there's the broad impact of how do we get the organization back up and online.
I think this has hit home even I live in a very rural area, but nearby us is the Swinomish tribe, and they have a casino there. The casino has been closed down for 3 weeks due to a ransomware attack.
There you go.
And so you think about revenue loss, 3 weeks out of a year of them being able to operate is really painful. And I know nothing about what might have happened, and certainly that could be a target. And I feel for the team there that's trying to recover and offer my patience, of course. But to your point, if they could have been back a couple of days later, I'm sure there were people that wanted to go play at the casino. Yeah.
We're much better prepared. I mean, we sent everybody home. Everybody sent everybody home during the pandemic. And so we're much better prepared today than we were 5 years ago for an event where everybody's work patterns shift dramatically.
Yeah.
But I think it would be a rare organization that could sustain 3 weeks of downtime without having a significant impact to their bottom line. And so I just think it's table stakes today, right? If you're not running that part of the table. I was talking to somebody a little while ago, CISO within a very large organization, and they when asked, what is your strategy in that scenario? They said, oh, no, we have other systems, and people would go into the office and they would sort of continue the work from there. That's a good bridge strategy. I mean, it shows that they've thought it through, but then you have to ask yourself the question, for how long can you sustain that?
Yeah.
Right. And then what? And so it's worth sitting down and understanding or talking to at events like this, right? The CISOs who have lived through these things are here.
Yeah.
Go sit down and talk to them and ask them, like, what were the hardest parts? It's worth having the conversation.
To bring it a little full circle, we brought up AI here. I have to say I'm a little jaded, which means both you and I are a little longer in career. I've been dealing with data and prediction and data science for a long time now. I love that these things have met a milestone, and we're doing some interesting stuff with generative AI and large language models. I see a lot of marketing hype about the tools that we build. How are you at Absolute thinking about how these tool sets are a powerful feature set as opposed to a nice to have thing? Yeah.
I do think long term, the impact of AI on our industry and any industry is profound.
Yeah.
I also believe we're in the early innings, and a lot of the marketing hype you're going to hear from a lot of vendors is going to be really machine learning and kind of and even in the generative phase, I think people are still learning how best to use these models and the risk and the governance model, right? Because I think that if you think about the use cases within any organization, and Absolute's not any different, right? There's sort of the internal application. So how can we best use it to improve the productivity of our organization?
Yeah.
And I think we're wide open to it, and we're doing what I know most organizations are doing, which is we're experimenting and playing with new tools and watching it closely. I would say we're making sure, because of the nature of our technology, we're trying to take a very thoughtful approach, right? So taking it through the multiple steps of, it's great to have the model and it's great to train the model, but then you have to, let's make sure that that we are being thoughtful about obedience and all of the different ways that this could be sort of used.
Yeah.
And the risk around it. And so I think that is true in the tools that are coming into the organization, that we want to make sure that we're using things that are safe and making sure you have an internal policy and process for how you're vetting some of this new technology that sometimes the employees are bringing in, right? It's interesting when we brought in mobile into the enterprise, everybody talked about shadow IT and BYO and how people were just directing data to their handset. And then we relived it with ChatGPT, and everybody just started redirecting data out to, and CISOs were like, whoa, hold on, toothpaste back in the tube, let's go. let's think about this for a moment. And so there's been some maturing around that. And then I think from a product perspective, trying to be very thoughtful about where is this going to be beneficial to our customers in how they access their data. So we've been on a path for the last 3-4 years in taking a lot of the rich insights that we see about data and endpoints and making sure the customer has that ability. So whether they're using that data within their own internal detection models, combining that data with data that they see coming from other systems, and as they start to do their own experimentation around AI, we want to make sure that our insights are accessible to that, but in a responsible way. And then the third piece I would say is a lot of good thinking going on around privacy implications and rights, right? I think that especially as you think about the data, right? Who owns what?
Yeah.
And how do you make sure that you are protecting your customers' rights with what belongs to them?
I know we've been talking for a decade now about an American Data Privacy Act, or United States. America is a big word. And I was reading recently the most recent version of the legislation, and it was interesting, the algorithmic requirements in the law about requiring a publishing of what data you used to build the model, how you tested the accuracy of the model. I think things that I've really wanted us to do to build better product, I was glad to see we're ensconced in that.
It's interesting, and again, we saw this with mobile and we saw this with big data, but some of the models that we sort of cringe about when we think about data analytics and privacy around advertising or around content creation are some of the things that are really focused on preventing the risk in those spaces. Actually work against, right, a lot of what we try to do on the cyber side. And so it is some of the same elements that you need to be able to see in order to ensure that the user is safe and protected. But those are a lot of the same data elements that somebody would need to see in order to use that data for a negative purpose, either a commercial negative purpose or a cyber negative purpose. And so I'm mindful of the fact that those conversations are incredibly complex, and it does take a lot of time to unpack it. And so if you think about it, you own your data and the company owns their data. But what about the product that sort of evolves as a result of the combination, right? And how does that, who owns that, and who gets to weigh in on how it's used? And it's really, really complex. It's interesting to see some of the things that are happening, for example, in Hollywood with content. It's interesting to see some of the things that are happening with ad tech. And some of those will sort of make their way into cyber as well.
And we're in the midst of the chaos, the whirlpool, trying to grasp onto something that we can hold on to. And I do think it's going to be a couple more years before we see what features stick and we build it into our product, and also what is efficient and what is a failure in internal utilization.
And there's going to be a big return on investment conversation coming as my team was sitting down having a number of conversations, and you're looking at, just as any organization, a lot of the AI modules or components are being introduced as sort of an add-on and so if you think, gosh, my company uses, and I'm just hypothetically speaking, right? If any organization is using a dozen security applications and has 100 applications that their employees are using, and if each one of those has a separate sort of add-on, I think you very quickly are going to shift your focus to which of those are really helpful and going to drive value within my organization versus which of those are cool magic tricks. And I need them to cook a little bit more before I'm going to really get the value that sort of justifies moving there.
Christy, this has been an exceptional conversation. I'm really grateful for you spending some time with us and our listeners. Obviously, incredibly intelligent take on the market, and I love what Absolute's doing. Thanks for joining us today on Secure Talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our first live cast. We're celebrating RSA this week. I'm going to go fill up my swag bag in the booths later on and see what's new and cool out there.
Have fun.
All right. Thanks, everybody.